welcome to Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Here Daily, a look at grain quality as harvest wraps up. Dr. Charles Hurburgh of Iowa State University joins us to share what type of corn and beans he's seen across the state. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining me on Farm Here Daily, we're going to take a look at grain quality in the state of Iowa. To do so, we have with us Dr. Charles Hurburgh. He is a professor emeritus with Iowa State University and a grain quality specialist. Dr. Hurburgh, thank you so much for joining us today. And let's just take a look at this harvest. Most folks are getting close to being done across the state. What have some of the reports you've been getting on grain quality this year look like?
Well, first of all, just about everybody is pretty much done, unless they've had some unusual rains or something like that to slow things down. But otherwise, most of the corn is out, and pretty much all the soybeans. I think 90-some% of the soybeans are harvested. So it moved very quickly. Harvest moved very quickly. We had such favorable weather, 80s, low dew points. So at that point, the crop was finished, and it matured extremely rapidly, probably more so than most people expected. Insofar as quality is concerned, and quality kind of goes together with yield. Corn is not as good as people thought it was going to be. My observation that somewhere between 10 and 20 bushel below expectations would kind of catch most of the reports and experiences. The weather was so variable that I think it was more a timing issue of rains than anything else. Although at the end of the season we didn't have much rain, that is true. But we lost some yield. From a quality standpoint, that probably cost us some test weight. Not a huge amount. I'm seeing 54, 55, 56 in that range, still easily enough to make market standards, but not as good as maybe we've been used to in the last few years, where we've had 60-pound test weight corn and everything looked really good. So it wasn't a disaster, but it will make the corn a little bit more sensitive to handling breakage and a little bit more sensitive to spoilage in storage. That said, the low moistures should keep us from having much of a spoilage problem in storage, provided we get it all cool. It came in hot, that is, it came in warm from the field. We've had low dew point days, and some nearly freezing temperatures. We've got some freezing temperatures coming this weekend, I think. Shouldn't be a problem to get it cool. And once done, we should have pretty good storage conditions, assuming we assuming we cool it uniformly. Please take the center cores out of your bins. I'm sorry, keep on going here.
No, keep that shifting around, because I was going to ask you about that. Last time we spoke on Farm Here Daily, you were expressing a little bit of concern for the amount of wet grain that might be coming in. This was before we, basically stopped all rain across the state of Iowa, I'm pretty sure.
And Labor Day,
yeah, and then it was very dry. Did we have, what was that moisture content that tended to come out of the fields over the last month or so of harvest?
Well, there were a lot of 12 to 14% corn harvested right out of the field. I suppose The average will be somewhere in the 15 to 16 range. And I say that because some folks had to harvest a little bit before even than they might have wanted to on account of poor stalk health. The dryness and rapid death didn't do the stalk health any good, nor did the southern rust. It kind of shut things down, and we didn't have the standability that maybe we might have had. So some folks had to had to take it for whatever it was, and that produced a little bit of 15 to 18% corn. But on average, through the heart of the harvest season, we were running in the 14s, 15s moisture, which is extremely dry. Not a problem for future storage. A lot of folks didn't even turn the dryer on. That we could put grain directly in aerated bins, but be sure to take the center cores out, because draw down. The southern rust arrested development enough that I'm hearing some reports of more fines, and more fines means clogged airflow in the middle, and you need to remove the inverted, get an inverted cone. Started out with a one that was peaked up like this, take it to inverted, and that should get enough of the fines out that airflow will be reasonably uniform. Nothing's perfect, but grain spreaders aren't perfect. They tend to give you a donut of fines rather than a pile in the middle, but grain spreaders aren't perfect. Still take the centers out.
Speaking of that, and also as you were talking about earlier, test weights, and the dry corn, did we see a lot of shattering during this process? Are we seeing lower grain quality because of how dry it was at
We
harvest?
we had some snapping roll shatter for corn, particularly, and soybeans too. I don't want to leave them out, because soybeans were in the 6 to 8% moisture range moving on into harvest. I mean, they
Wow.
dried. Soybeans will dry very, very quickly in the field. And so we had some extremely dry soybeans. And then that, of course, means more splits and more header shatter, just as we had more snapping roll shatter and so forth in the field. That will give us more fines than we might have ordinarily had. Combines work best around 18% moisture, somewhere in that area, 17, 18, 19 in there. That usually is the best moisture for getting clean shelling, whole cobs, and not a lot of shatter loss. Well, we went past that, I think. So there will be some more. That's what I said about the grain breakage. We're going to have more grain breakage and handling right along. So that's just the way it's going to be. Shouldn't be a problem for the usage. Most of the grain is used either in ethanol or in feed, and it shouldn't create a problem. But we just recognize that we had more broken stalks and more lodged corn, which will create a little more foreign material. There's no doubt about it. We can't get around it.
I think it's fair to say Iowa had some serious disease pressure this year,
Boy, did we.
and and I'm curious, did that affect grain quality at all outside of, naturally the corn not performing as well as usual? Was it actually affecting the ear or the grain itself?
Well, it affected fill, the kernel fill. And that's where we lost test weight, was in lesser degrees of fill. So to that extent, it affected grain quality. It was not a field mold problem that you would think of if it got turned green or something like that. It was not that. In fact, a lot of combines and people turned orange for the dust that was generated in the field, but it came on late, relatively late at any rate. And then with the moisture and then dryness conditions later, it exploded in fields, to the point where we got a lot of. It helped the dyeing process. We'll put it that way. It stopped the filling process, and that was the primary impact. It didn't create moldy corn, and it won't create utilization problems particularly. And we don't expect it automatically next year, because southern rust doesn't overwinter. So, if we have strong southerly winds and dry weather at some point in the growing season, we could get it again. I mean, that comes up from the south, and they have it every year, and we could get it again. But it's not an automatic given that we'll have it next year.
Is that the same for soybeans in terms of disease pressure affecting pods?
Yes, we had some sudden death syndrome this year. If we get a yeah, high moisture spring, and we're planting in wet soils and so forth, we could have that again. That doesn't necessarily have to come up on the wind from the south, but we could have that again. But uh, seed treatments and fungicides proved their value this year. Where used, the results were better.
I've definitely heard stories specifically on Southern Rust that neighboring fields could have seen as much as a 50 bushel difference
That's
with just a,
extreme,
a
but
timely application.
yeah, I'll be interested to see what Allison Robertson's data shows at the ICM conference coming up in December, because they test these things every year, and for the most part over years, the yield advantage to the fungicide hasn't been all that great.
Right.
But this year, I think she's going to show where there's some significant benefits from fungicide.
I think I got a sneak peek when I spoke to her last month. I think she
Probably
said
did.
at the extreme end it was 100 bushels an acre,
Yeah,
with a very timely application, very extreme. But there were quite a few 50s, so we'll have to see. I'm very excited to see some of her research on that as well.
yeah. That'll be a well attended session this year.
I bet. As far as grain safety this year, as we are getting more into the storage side and some drying side, you said lots of fines. Fire hazards, is that a big concern this year? And maybe dust hazards as well?
Dust, probably so. Fire, we didn't use enough gas for drying that we had a high incidence of dryer fires. The biggest fire risk was on combine because the fields were so dry. Right at the end of harvest, the fields were so dry. Um, I don't think we'll have ongoing fire risk. We will, however, have somewhat more dust created in handling. Uh, Grain elevators will probably experience this more than farmers, because they tend to need to move grain, turning it from one bin to the other or what have you, and handle it at higher rates of speed. But we will have to recognize that dust control measures will be pushed a little bit at grain elevators, either the pneumatic or application of oil.
Let's talk about farm storage as well, because we did have that dispute with China where we weren't selling any soybeans, and that's a huge export destination. Are we facing a pretty big backlog in Iowa from products like soybeans that are taking up bin space where in normal years they would not be?
Paul, part of the answer to your question is yes. Yes, the soybeans are in places where they wouldn't ordinarily be. However, 10 to 20 bushels less corn uh, kind of makes up for some of that storage shortage.
Interesting.
Now, particularly grain elevators had to reallocate storage a little bit this year to hang on to soybeans. Same for farmers. Farmers typically, more of the soybeans are marketed from the field than corn. A higher percentage is marketed out of the field than from corn. Producers tend to choose to store corn. Um, you get more cash flow quickly with soybeans, while price is higher. Typically, they've been the crop that gets sold the most. So we'll have soybeans in storage on farms, maybe than more than we would have, certainly more at grain elevators. 6 to 8% moisture soybeans is, they store well. There's no doubt about that. But I don't want any of your listeners to think that just because you have super dry grain, it can't spoil. Because without aeration, to keep the temperatures uniform, there will be air currents move around in the bin, and there can well be spoilage in parts of the bin. That doesn't say put it in there and walk away and don't look at it again. No, a periodic evening of the temperatures will still be needed to maintain the impacts of or the benefits, I should say, of that dry corn. However, we should have no problem in making it into spring this year with the dry corn that we've had. And it looks like the market might be picking up. Who knows?
I think you've already mentioned it during the course of this interview, but just to emphasize it a bit more, as we do approach winter season, what is it that you are specifically keeping an eye on or watching for, either in development or in learning more about grain storage, grain quality this winter?
Well, we have dry corn going in. So the main thing is that we need to keep the temperatures uniform and cool. Temperatures in the 30s and below. Some people don't like to have frozen, don't like to freeze grain. I don't think that's so bad as long as the grain is clean and it wasn't frozen wet so you get chunks and that sort of thing. But if you have clean grain, then below freezing temperatures is not really a problem. And the problem if you get chunks is plugged spouts and that sort of thing, and it makes things difficult to move. But going forward, it's mainly maintaining temperature control, because we had a pretty storable crop. It wasn't super because the test weights aren't up there where we might have expected or might have hoped, but nonetheless, we should, with routine aeration, be able to make the grade, so to speak, through into the spring, and then we can go on from there. Personally, I favor keeping the grain cold as long as you can. That means when you're not running the fans, close the fan ducts so that the air doesn't circulate in there, and that sort of thing. I favor keeping it clean. Others are of the school of thought that if we keep it in the 30s and then warm it up with the outside air temperature, this year the winter shouldn't be one or the other, because both strategies I think will work given the dryness of corn.
Dr. Charles Hurburgh. Dr. Charlie Hurburgh is a professor emeritus with Iowa State University. He is a grain quality specialist joining us on Farm Here Daily. Thank you so much for your time today.
Glad to be here, Dave.
This is Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports. Again, I'm your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.